This episode is sponsored by Magic Mind and Wix Studio.
When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back, and this is the HTML All Things Podcast. This episode is titled, Why is Everyone Unhappy with JavaScript? We're going to be taking a look at the State of JavaScript 2024 survey. And yes, it's a survey that was done for 2024. When we first wrote this title, I was thinking, hang on, shouldn't this be State of JavaScript 2025? But that's not the case. Obviously, you can't survey people on the first, the 9th? So the first 8 or 9 days. So anyway, if this sounds interesting to you, you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on Patreon, leave a review rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. So Mike, you actually dove into this survey and have, kind of found some pain points, some, I guess, issues, weird little things about JavaScript. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the get-go, I think these surveys do serve quite a big purpose for at least people that are interested in staying on top of the industry. I think we can all get really heads down in our jobs and heads down in whatever, tasks we have at hand. But it is kind of important to at least, have a finger on the pulse of what's going on. If we're, in the weeds for 10 years and we come out of it and all of a sudden the paradigm for web development has shifted and you've been laid off, it could have an impact on your career. So just checking up on these surveys, you're listening to a podcast, so you're obviously already interested in being up to date on web development. These surveys, especially State of JavaScript 2024, 2023, 2022, they've been doing it for quite a while, are really good ways to kind of see the community sentiment on different aspects of the industry. And for this specific survey, there was about 14,015 people surveyed. So that's a pretty good sample size considering our community is not that large. So we can probably take that as a pretty good indicator about where we're at. Now, the bias here with surveys like this are that a lot of people that are heads down and are in the weeds, which is a very significant amount of the development community out there, aren't part of a community and therefore don't look at surveys, right? So this has to be from someone that at least is somewhat interested in staying on top of a community. So that's a little bit of the bias you can expect. So these people are most likely people that know new technologies, are most likely using new technologies. They're not, developers from 10 years ago or 20 years ago or something like that just don't want to update their skills, which is fine, depending on what works for you. But regardless, there is that bias, I believe, in surveys like this. But 14,000 people is a significant sample size for our industry. So there are some really interesting findings this year, and I'm going to dive directly into them. I'll kind of give you some headlines about what we'll be discussing throughout the episode. The first one that kind of shocked me a little bit is that a lot of JavaScript frameworks and different libraries and stuff like that are actually having a slight decrease in happiness and retention levels. Maybe not retention, but especially happiness and awareness and stuff like that. It seems that there's been a shift over the last few years to either stagnation or decline, where people are just kind of, I don't know if they're getting fed up with new libraries, or they're just looking at the next shiny thing or something like that. Established libraries are starting to go down in a lot of different metrics, and I'll get into it in more detail in the first segment. But that's the first thing I noticed. The next thing I noticed that the JavaScript language as a whole is mostly just stagnant. It's a little bit of a decline over the last 4 years, but it's mostly just stagnant in terms of, again, happiness level. So it's just a weird trend where I feel like 3 or 4 years ago when we were starting this podcast, or we were in the middle of the podcast time, I feel like JavaScript had a pretty good reputation from inside the JavaScript community, because that's who we're polling, right? Outside the JavaScript community, everyone shits on JavaScript. That's not about this. That's not what this is about. we're talking internal people that are coding with JavaScript on a daily basis. I feel like people were really optimistic about where it was going. And it seems that optimism has started to wane, and maybe people are starting to like just maybe get tired of certain things, maybe get like they're tired of waiting for certain features to come in. There's a lot of like slowdown in innovation and stuff like that. So I think there's some of that going on. So again, we'll talk about that. Another kind of surprising thing, and we had actually an episode on this technology this year, is Astro is the framework that kind of jumped up this year. So if you remember, I think James Quick was on our podcast. He was a big proponent of Astro. Really cool framework. We're going to touch on it, why I think it's doing so well this year, and what I think, is in store for it.
I want to just actually jump in, sorry, right here before we move on, is what I was thinking of, how you had mentioned in the episode how there's a lot of people that are just sort of like head down, they're in the weeds, or they just sort of like do their tickets when they, they show up to their day job, they do their tickets and they go home, more or less. I'm kind of wondering in terms of, the overall happiness and all the rest of this, and then Astro kind of being, that meta framework to sort of beat maybe this year, in 2025. I guess my question is, like, how many people are creators versus how many people are creating? And like now I'll define that, what I mean by that. So there's some people, and this is just my definition, this isn't like a dictionary definition, but there's some people who don't give a crap about what tools they use to create something. They will get excited about convenient upgrades to tools or new tools that make their job easier, but they more care about the actual thing that they're creating. Like they're more about, this is a cool website, this is a cool web app. And so I guess my creator and creator or well, I don't even know what I said anymore, but my two definitions is kind of thrown out the door already. But the whole point of what I'm trying to say is like, there's going to be people that don't care about the tools they're using, short of them hindering their job in some way, like hindering that vision. Whereas some people who are in the weeds are going to be those that are creating the apps potentially, right? And they don't care about the overall vision. They either don't care about it and they're more there and they're more excited about actually using programming languages and solving problems with computers. Do you know what I'm trying to say here? Like there's like, I don't know if it's like more of a creative angle versus someone's coding angle, but I'm just curious because both of those type of people, I would imagine would have a say in the happiness level of JavaScript. And like one of them is kind of one step removed, right? Like someone who's more of a visionary who may code on occasion, right? Who may go in and code in JavaScript, whatever. They're more so all about, let's get this site, looking great. Let's get this site, whatever. And a prime example, like you and I, Mike, we work with clients and we have a couple of clients where they have made either their hobby their side hustle or their hobby their main job. And so they don't care about the technologies and all the rest of the stuff. They only talk to us about vision. Like they want this, this table to look super cool. They want the layout to be super cool. They want all these things to be super cool. And what they're talking about is not, this is a super cool way to declare a variable. They're talking more about, this is a super cool website, and this is why I think it needs to be a super cool website. Now, obviously, a client in this particular case is not the person writing JavaScript, right? But there are people who found companies like developers, JavaScript developers that found companies that become like that, where they go, I think that this needs to be like this. Like if I created a website on something I was passionate about, it does become, to a certain level, like this is my property, right? This is what I envision for the site. And unless profitability is something that I'm considering, if it's purely a passion project, I mean, it's a passion project. And that I think maybe plays a role here. Like I don't have like a fully fleshed out thought on what the role would be, but I am curious in like, if you're a person that's just sitting there doing your tickets and you answered this, which you may not have because you've just been answering, doing your tickets, which is totally fine. Like, is there going to be a satisfaction level difference there? Like, are the creators, I keep using those two definitions, that's just a bad way to say it, but are the people who are, kind of being the creative vision, are those people getting annoyed, right? Are they saying, they're sitting down to do a ticket themselves they're the creator of the company, but they have their startup, they have their cool website. They're sitting down and they're like, man, JavaScript is just not efficient enough for me. Like, it's not allowing that actual creative vision to flow. Versus someone who's just answering tickets. Like, I wonder if there's any discrepancy there. And I just wanted to bring that up now before we kind of get into like the whole, you know, all the rest of this stuff. Like, I don't know if we're going to be able to answer that question today, but it's a big question, I think, because a lot of people that we talk to will just be all about, this is the thing we need to do. We need to make a glossary. This is the thing we need to do. We need to make a leaderboard. This is the thing we need to do. And they're not talking about it being a cool leaderboard or a really efficient glossary or an SEO. They don't care. It's just sort of like, I've been assigned to make this SEO friendly. I've been assigned to make an animation on this leaderboard. Like, they don't care short of the assignment.
Yes. And that I mentioned, or like, I think that there is a bias to these like surveys, right? Like, I think that that's the bias, is exactly what you're saying, Matt, is that these people that answer surveys aren't really usually the people that are just heads down and just like doing tickets and not caring about what the hell they're even doing, really. They're just, it's just a job to them, which is fine. Again, it's perfectly okay for it to just be a job and not be a whole lifestyle like it is for me. But I think people that are listening to this podcast fall under the other group of people because they're already going out of their way to step into the world of, I want to stay up to date. And as soon as you do that, that means you have at least some passion, some interest, whatever it is, in the world of JavaScript or in the world of web development or in the world of programming. And therefore, this survey very much probably includes your subset of people, the people that are listening to this podcast. So there is bias, 100%. There is that bias that you have to account for in this. There's going to be a bunch of people that are not represented, the people that are especially not interested in discussing languages and figuring out what the best language is and figuring out what the best framework is. They're just there to do a job. Having said that, I think there is a lot of value to be more on the side of being involved in the industry and understanding what's going on. Again, we're at a point in time where jobs are pretty competitive. It's tougher to get into the industry, and that little bit of passion that you have for all the different technologies could win you the job over someone that is more of a, hey, I'm just going to go to the job and get these tickets done, right? Like, they could be a better developer than you, but in the interview, if you show interest in the technologies of the interviewer because you're aware of them, and the person that's a better developer but is less connected to the industry doesn't, they could lose the job and you could get the job. So that's the perspective of that I'm kind of throwing it at, is that it's important to stay aware of this stuff. And obviously, if you're listening to the podcast, you're in that category. So we're going to be catering to you, but understand that it does not represent the entire ecosystem of developers out there.
And honestly, like, I've seen this in person working in an office. Like, when I was back in IT, I saw like some developers would complain about something they were assigned, saying, this is a waste of time. The end user, like the consumer, is not going to want this, or whatever their complaints were. And they're kind of looking at what they're actually producing at the end of the day. They're making one small part of this, customer facing piece of software or firmware or whatever it was they're making. And they're looking at it and saying, the consumer hates this. And then you would literally have people across the aisle in the cubicle, next to them or down the row, and they would say, you were told to do it, shut up. Like, quite literally, that would be the thing. You were told to do it, shut up. Like, who cares? And that's the two different minds and they're both doing the same job, right? Like, mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they both must put their head down and must do the tickets. But it's interesting to see that dynamic between the two people, where some people actually care about what they're making, and other people are like, I'm supposed to be making like a chair, and I'm making a table, but I was told to make this table, so okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a little bit represented here. I think that's where you see a little bit of the frustration from people that are just people that are more passionate, and then the people that are more pragmatic and just don't really care. You'll see them side on the side of like just complacency, right? Like, they'll be in the middle tier of people. So I think that particular case is probably represented to some degree in this survey, because if there's some people that are pragmatic but interested in the industry as a whole. There's some people that are like to hate on stuff and they're interested in the industry. Anyway, I think those kind of personalities are probably here. It's just the people that just don't give a crap about anything but their tickets, those are the people that probably won't be represented. Yeah. So with that, I think that's a good like baseline of where this JavaScript, State of JavaScript survey probably represents. There's a few other things that we'll be mentioning in the episode. One of them is going to be a little bit on JavaScript features that people are happy with. One of them being nullish co-sailing. I'll explain what that is shortly, but that is apparently the number one feature by like a huge margin that people love about
that sounded
JavaScript.
like a video game,
it's
character name. Like it's like that's the wizard you go to or something.
It's a very mundane feature too. Like it's nothing mind-boggling, and I don't know. I like it. I use it all the time. I just didn't think that people would choose it as their number one feature. But anyway, it's there.
Character name coming up.
Yeah. To kind of no one's surprise, in my opinion, everyone wants static typing. So like TypeScript essentially built into JavaScript. That's the number one wanted feature. I agree with that. And then because of that, TypeScript is also the dominant thing in JavaScript. Like it's now edged out JavaScript as the thing that people use most often. So most developers will code in TypeScript almost 100% of the time rather than even touch JavaScript. And the last thing that we'll touch on is obviously going to be about AI. That's been a big thing in the last few years, or the last couple of years at least. And in this survey, what I found out is either people are not using AI as much as I thought, or they're lying about using AI. No, it's one of those two things. Yeah, and we'll get to it. But to jump right in, what's with the declining happiness? Like, what is that metric? What does that mean? What actually surrounds this weird pattern in the industry? So the first thing I noticed was actually in meta frameworks. So meta frameworks are frameworks that kind of combine the front end and the back end, like Next.js, SvelteKit, Nuxt, Astro, for example. Those are considered meta frameworks. They're not front end frameworks. They're not back end frameworks. They're both combined into one. We've talked about them on the podcast many times. Those seem to have some friction right now, in my opinion, or at least according to these stats. Most of the stats that we're seeing here, we'll have links in the show notes. So go check out the show notes at htmlthings.com. But we'll have links in the show notes to every single point that we're going to be making here, because there's like a million different sections in this survey. But the one that really interests me is the meta frameworks ratio over time. So I'm a big proponent of meta frameworks, or at least I have been for a little while. And I'm a little bit surprised to see the dissatisfaction with them, like, according to at least these stats. So for instance, the usage of like the meta frameworks in general seem to be either stagnating, going up slightly, or going down. So it's not like the usage is like going off the charts. It seems that in general, the usage overall is a little bit stagnant. And popular meta frameworks, Next.js being by far the most popular, is on a decline now. So last year, it was still increasing pretty significantly. So from 2022 to 2023, it went from 48% to 56% usage. And then this year, it went down from 56 to 54. And that's an interesting stat, because every year before that, it was going up on a pretty high amount, like, 4%, 5%, 10%, 12%. Like it was just like it looked like it was going to dominate. But with other frameworks coming in to the fray and becoming really good, I guess they've started to kind of slow down and get the competition going. And the competition really comes down to Nuxt.js, Astro, and SvelteKit right now. I believe Gatsby is also a competitor, but it is also very much going down as well. And Gatsby is, again, a React version, like very similar to Next.js. It was actually, I think, much better than Next.js initially, but it just hasn't been able to keep up with features. And therefore, people will obviously go to the more popular thing for their front-end framework, which is React. Next.js has been kind of eating it at lunch for a very long time, and it's been always going down. So yeah, the big standouts to me, again, we'll talk about Astro in a little bit, but Astro had a really big jump. SvelteKit actually had a slight decline, and everything else has been kind of a little bit here and there, not really worthwhile to talk about. So that's just from usage perspective. But from what the interesting part about this is that positivity. So there's a positivity metric where when you were doing this survey, you can rank kind of like what you're using and how you feel about the framework that you're using. This positivity, like for the most part, is almost all negative. If you look at the chart, it's just kind of angled down for almost every framework, I think, other than, what is this one? Nuxt.js. So heck yeah, I love Vue. That one went up by 1%. So good. Everything else has gone down. Next.js has gone down by like almost 10%. Even SvelteKit, which is again one of those things that usually is on the higher end of being like positive and nice and good, and people being happy about it, has also gone down like 5%. So everything but Astro shot up 4%, pretty significant amount. I think it's by far the highest positivity rating framework out there, which says a lot. And does, like, in my opinion, matter quite a bit, because again, the trajectory of a framework really does play into, like, should you choose it for your next big project and at work and development and stuff like that? Because the less positivity, the more people will start to look for other options, and then the less kind of progress in that framework. And just to kind of chime in on why I think this is happening, what I'm thinking is happening, and I've experienced this myself, is that as you build with these frameworks, over time, you're going to run into issues, right? These are meant to be serverless frameworks. They don't have to be serverless, but a lot of them, like, will push serverless on you quite heavily. Vercel not owns, but it is maintaining essentially two of the bigger ones, SvelteKit and Next.js. And they're very much pushing using Vercel, which is a very big serverless hosting platform, on you. And in a simple application, it's great. When you have less users, it's great. And when you're trying to build quickly, it's great. But as you progress and as you mature and as you bring on more developers, serverless starts to become more of a blocker for you than a helper. And so a lot of people will start to try to switch from serverless to servers. And then that's where this, like, I think the sentiment on the framework starts to kind of go down a little bit, because these coupling the front end and the back end makes it a little bit difficult to decouple it, a little bit more difficult to decouple it. Makes it, there's certain edge cases in a more complex app that make it a little bit more difficult to work with. Each one of these frameworks has its own limitations that you have to work around. And as you develop more, you'll reach those limitations quicker. They're still great, in my opinion. They're still really good to get started with. They're still a really good stepping stone, and you can build very, very efficient, really, really powerful applications with them. It's just naturally, and to be honest, I think this happens with almost every piece of technology. The more you use something, the more you find the boundaries, and the more you obviously start to get a little bit jaded with it, right? So these frameworks have now started to be a lot more mature. I think like SvelteKit is, 9 years old or something like that, or Svelte in general is 9 years old. React is quite old, like even either, I think, a little bit older than that. And Nuxt is quite old. So all of these frameworks are kind of reaching that like maturity aspect of it, where people are using them quite significantly in production. And that's bringing with it that very, I think, normal decline that should probably happen with any of them. Hopefully the developers of these frameworks see that and are like trying to innovate and stuff like that. That pushes innovation. That's good. But I'm not too worried about it, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't jump over to some other framework just because it has only positivity. You want to kind of take everything into consideration, make sure that if the positivity is dropping significantly, that's kind of a little bit of a red flag. Next.js a little bit has that right now because due to complexity. But if the positivity is a little bit dropping for a couple of years, hopefully it can pick back up. And I say this as a SvelteKit person that's trying to convince myself to like continue down that path. So it's a little bit of bias there. But Astro is now also kind of coming up and being like, maybe I should use that.
There's some points in here I want to say. So I'm looking at the positivity graph, and like you've already mentioned some of this, but the top two, the top being Astro and the second being SvelteKit. But I would like to say that Next.js is right behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Next.js has had a larger fall-off point from 2022. Next.js has dropped from 77% to 57%, which is quite a lot. And just in the last year, from 2023 to 2024, we dropped from 66% to 57%. But I would like to say that SvelteKit has also been dropping consistently. So again, this is the positivity graph. From its starting ratings in this survey in 2021, we went from 75%, and we lost more than 10%. In fact, we've lost 14% down to 61% in 2024. Whereas Astro has been climbing. And like, I get it. Like you were saying, Mike, like SvelteKit are starting to mature and things like that. And Astro might just be like the golden, the golden boy on the block here. But in terms of this survey, they also began in 2021, and they've climbed, albeit a little bit, but they have climbed from 68% to 73%. And this is in the positivity. So like SvelteKit is always presented to me as sort of like the golden boy, like, hey, it's this framework that's kind of an underdog and but it's punching above its weight class. Like, it's so good to code with. It's so good and this and that. And I actually have a question about this. Now, this might be total nonsense. This is why it's a question and not a statement. Are there a lot of people coming from other types of development going into web? And are we seeing some hatred come from people that maybe were coding on desktop or mobile or other things where their stacks may have been a lot more stable? Maybe their stacks aren't more stable. I'm not those types of developers. But I always hear about all these JavaScript frameworks, this, that, and the other thing. I don't hear about that stuff about, this is the best way to code in mobile. I hear about, maybe 3 ways to code up like an Android app realistically. And one of them is kind of like a far cry down, or it's like, hey, wrap it in a web view, right? Something like that, where it's like 1 or 2 ways to code it. Are there people that are being assigned, like, hey, make a web app and then we'll port it everywhere or things like that? Is that what's happening here? And then they're coming and they're like, oh my God, I'm coming from what I assume is a much more stable stack environment where it's like we could have a few variants, but in general, it's not too many. And again, this is an assumption. And then they're coming into web development and it's like, well, do you like JavaScript? Well, you could use PHP, but no one likes that, but it is really good. And then, we could use this. No, we could use, no, okay, go over here. No, we use this. No, we actually use plugins for that. That's client side. No, this is server side. No, we got to serve this over here. Okay, that's through another vendor. And like, we got to choose a host, but the host is it a cloud host or is it like a pre-made? And it becomes this like that. That's chaos. Like it sounds like chaos. Like if I were to go to develop an Android app right now, I'm going to again assume that the beginning is going to be like, would you like to code in this or code in this? It's been a long time since I've looked. I want to say Kotlin or Java. And then there's like Apache Cordova, which might not be called Apache Cordova anymore. I think they may have like rebranded. I'm not sure on that either. It's been a while since I've upgraded my Android knowledge.
It's in here too if you want to take a look. I believe if you go to features, if you click on libraries and then you click on mobile and desktop, there's all the different ways you can kind of code, at least cross-platform applications, I should say. Yeah, there's just a bunch. And in general, yes, what you're saying is correct. Whenever you have someone coming in from a different language that's strongly typed, that's class, object-oriented, that has more tooling around it, better compilers and stuff like that, which is most languages, to be fair. Like JavaScript has issues. They're very legitimate issues. You're going to have people hating on JavaScript. It's going to happen very often because people just don't want to adapt to it. They don't want to learn a million different frameworks. There is no like happy path really in the JavaScript world. Having said that, you can look at Next.js and React and be like, that's probably the happy path, considering how many people use it. So like there are happy paths, but it's hard to find them because of everyone kind of fighting each other for the top spot and the constant evolution of frameworks, which again, good thing, but also a bad thing because they're trying to do some crazy things and therefore deprecating other stuff. So it's a little bit chaotic. And I think that also plays into this negative sentiment that's been happening on the steady like stagnation and decline of happiness in JavaScript, is that I think people were expecting at some point JavaScript to mature to the point where you can just be like, use this and you'll be fine. And that was going to be what Next.js was. Like Next.js was supposed to be that thing that you just point to and use it. But then they introduced App Router, which is like a server-side rendered or server component thing that just made it more complicated. So now you have to relearn Next.js with the introduction of App Router. And then they had a whole bunch of issues when they introduced it. And it's just like, even the stable stuff becomes, by trying to compete with the cutting edge, becomes not stable and harder to comprehend. And therefore, it's tough. Like I talked to people that code in, for instance, Solidity on the Web3 side, Python, on the finance side, and then they have to go into JavaScript and they're like, what is happening? Like how, like there's no sanity here. Like, how do I do this? And you're like, well, you could do it like this, like that. You start, like, if you start to explain to a developer how a complex distributed application works in JavaScript, it becomes this insane web of crap. Like, almost like when you're looking at the Pepe Silva meme for like not Parks and Recreation. What is it? Anyway, the show that Charlie Day's on. I can't remember the show's name. Anyway, there's a really good meme. It's like that, like someone trying to find a serial killer map with like a million different, strings and stuff like that into different things. It's like a big mind map. And that's what it becomes every time. Like, you're like, oh, you have to deploy here on Vercel, but then you need to use these workers to deploy over there. And then you need to use this bundler to build everything. And then you just get into like 10 or 15 different layers in a 10-minute conversation. And to you, the developer that's worked with that over the last 2 or 3 years, it's not a big deal because that's what you deal with on a daily basis. But to bring someone new in, it's chaos every time. Like, every time I try to bring someone new in, I try to do it as simply as possible, and it becomes chaos. And they're like, what is that? Like, why do you do this to yourself? And I'm like, well, I'm used to it. Like, this is where I live, right? And on the one hand, there's some things that, web developers don't have to deal with. We don't have to deal with a ton of math. We don't have to deal with, complex compilers and stuff like that. Like, we don't have to deal with certain things that are actually very difficult on the coding side. We don't have to worry about memory management. There's a bunch of stuff, right? Like a bunch of really complex things. Like, we don't really care about which array sorting framework is the best. Like, we do to a certain degree, but they're all extrapolated for us. Like, we all have abstractions of them, and we just use what's available and what makes sense. But from that perspective, easier to code in web development. From the perspective of like infrastructure and perspective of setting up development environments and perspective of like consistency is probably the biggest one. It's nightmare. Like, it's an absolute nightmare. And people come into it and be like, I don't want to do this. Like, I understand why people get paid so much to do this, because it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. So like, that's probably where it's starting to bleed into the JavaScript community, where people are just like, can we just have some cohesion, like some understanding of this? I've heard people start to like ask for instance, like 5 years ago, this would be blasphemy, but people are starting to ask for an all-included framework similar to Laravel in JavaScript, where you have your authentication built in, where you have your database abstraction connections built in, where you have routing fully built in, where you have like an all-inclusive framework, like an opinionated piece of technology that doesn't require you to choose 15 different libraries to be able to build a full stack application, right? Like, that's the rumblings of that have started to happen. Like, I've seen people talk about like the next evolution of SvelteKit might have that kind of stuff in it, right? And again, 5 years ago, people were like, no, you should be able to choose whatever you want for everything. And that's cool, but like, explain that to someone.
This is very much sounding like the Android versus iPhone argument. It sounds weird, but like, I'll explain. So I recently got a Samsung tablet for work. I'm going to like put shows and stuff on there for it, because I always have background noise. And it's going to be a part of my desk setup. And so I connected my personal phone, which is a Samsung phone, to it. And with Android, it's like, these are both Samsung devices. They're both Android. I can, because they're both Samsung, can I do some unique stuff? And one of the things is, like, you can pass phone calls to it, but it also asks, can I pass text messages? And you're like, yeah, but I'm using Google Messages on my phone. And so it became this web of like, because Android's more like, choose what you want to do. So what happens is I'm like, yeah, like, allow messages. So then it starts receiving, like, I start receiving text messages on my phone through RCS. Those get passed to Samsung Messages, which is also an alternative on my phone. Those get passed to Samsung Messages on the tablet. And then I'm like, well, hang on, I don't want that. But what's weird is the tablet comes pre-installed with, and it actually has Google Messages at the bottom on the main sort of like taskbar area. So it's like, well, hang on, what am I supposed to do here? And then I go and Google it. It's like, oh, well, you get to choose which one you want to do. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll use Samsung Messages on the tablet. So I send a text back, and it sends an SMS instead of an RCS back to whoever I'm responding to. And for some reason, doesn't have their name associated with it, which may have just been something because it was still like syncing and everything. So that might have been that. But then I'm like, well, hang on, like, what's going on here? So then I'm like, okay, let me Google this. So I Google this issue, and it's like, oh, if you want to use Samsung, or if you want to use Google Messages, go into the settings, and there's a specific like messages for Galaxy like setting or something like that along those lines. And that's in the settings. Now, not only was the guide incorrect in where it was in the settings, but it was a little bit more buried than what it said. But I was like, hang on. So Google Messages has like a specific setting for Galaxy, but when I went in and set this like other app up, it didn't specifically, like, you can already see this web, right? Like, I'm not going to bore you with the rest of it because there was more to it. And it's like, I eventually like disabled messages, like Samsung Messages on my tablet. And I'm just using like messages for Google Messages on my actual tablet. And then I've toggled on or made sure that the permissions were on for like text on Galaxy devices or whatever it was. And then the phone does work. Like the phone calls come in on both. But like, it's just, there was something there where it's like, I was explaining this actually to a friend who's an iPhone user. And he was like, what the hell is going on? And I was like, this is what happens when like you have 1,000,001 choices. In this case, it was only 2, but like in Android in general, you have 1,000,001 choices. I can switch my SMS app whenever the heck I want. And I understand that some people want that freedom and some people want that, which is very reminiscent of JavaScript, where like there's like 1,000,001 ways to do everything. But in this case, this is a work device. Like I am literally putting like podcasts, TV shows, educational content. Like this is a work media device that's sitting at my work desktop because I have an iPad for fun and play games on it and stuff. And like, this is a work device. I just want my friggin' phone calls and my text messages to go across on both because I was more or less playing with it because again, it's my personal phone. I was just kind of playing with it. And it's like, if I was a serious like executive or something, and I was like, man, I'm going to sign into both my Samsung devices, it's going to be seamless. No, it isn't. Because it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. Because you have this like, well, you actually have 2 things here, and you can sign in with your Google account, but you could actually not opt in to sign in with your Google account on Android Messages, and like it's just or Google Messages, and it's sort of like, well, hang on a second here, like what am I doing? Like, wouldn't it just make more sense to be like sign into, you know, if this existed, my Android ID, and sign into my Android ID on both devices, and it says, would you like to sync text messages? You say yes, and it goes across. I would imagine that's how iPhones and iPads and MacBooks are. I would imagine. I don't use those other than an iPad and an iPhone, but they're not connected. Long story. It doesn't matter. Point of the matter is, if I was in the Apple ecosystem entirely and everything I had was Apple and they were all connected, according to my friend, it's very, very seamless. It's just sort of like you sign in, maybe there's some permissions or whatever, and then it's just sort of like messages works across and like phone works across and like whatever's compatible just kind of like works across. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there being like, okay, flip that. No, turn that other thing. Okay, hold up. We got, you know, Microsoft Edge coming in here to edge out. Okay, gotta get Chrome out of here. And it's like, holy cripe. Like, what are we doing here? And I feel like this is what's happening with JavaScript. I might get a little bit of flack for this, but I feel like JavaScript is like great for people who want those choices, but it's the nerdy option, if you will. Like, it feels like the nerdy option. And I'm one of those people. I use an Android device for the nerdy option. I like being able to change things. Sometimes I don't. In this particular case, I didn't. But like, I get it. Now imagine you're a person who shows up and you don't give a crap about any like coding language. You don't care about computers. You don't care about anything. And you have an idea to make like a new like app of some kind. A game, an app, doesn't matter. It could be finance, could be just for fun, could be whatever. You go to developers and this is what you're presented with, is like this web of like, go there, no, left, okay, no. If we do it that way, we got to switch this, but we could use both plugins together. Okay, hang on, we got a cache problem now. Okay, hold up. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do some custom code here, but this breaks core, so we're going to have to, now I'm sure that this exists in all tech stacks, but in my experience, and it is just my experience, I might be incorrect here, this is a gong show. Like, this is a total disaster when it comes to JavaScript. Like, JavaScript feels like that Android experience I had, but all the freaking time. Oh, use them inline. No, okay, hold up. We gotta like, okay, hang on. You're using, okay, we gotta go back one. It's like, what's going on here? Like, to set up the dev environment takes like several days? Like, this is where we're at?
Yeah. And there's some like nuance to that. Like, I think we're shitting on it a little bit too much. There are some really streamlined ways to do it. And
absolutely.
Again, I think if you're in it, you start to understand the chaos and it starts to make sense to a certain degree. It's really just from the outside looking in, it just looks like chaos. And
But it's a hard sell to those people that just
It
want to
is
get
hard.
make an app, right? Or
Correct,
make a
correct.
web app.
yeah, it is a hard sell, and it's a hard sell to switch up like frameworks. It's a hard sell to move around. Like everything becomes a harder sell when you add complexity, and there is certainly a lot of complexity in the JavaScript ecosystem. Having said that, I think, again, the declining happiness is showing the maturity of these frameworks. The front-end frameworks, I want to say, are still pretty up there in happiness. This is kind of a cherry-picked segment a little bit where I found like meta frameworks are very relative to what I'm doing and what I talk about a lot. So that's very much like relevant. But there are some points in the JavaScript ecosystem that are like, hey, increasing happiness, increasing everything. Svelte, in fact, is one of the top positivity frameworks in terms of a front-end framework. And I think we'll get into Astro, but there's certain ways that people can start using Svelte in different situations. But honestly, Matt, I think I need like a reset. Like my mind just needs a reset. Is there anything you can offer me to get my mind reset right now?
I do indeed, actually. And that is, I want to talk about mental well-being. So it's a brand new year. It's 2025. And some of us are rearing? I don't know. Getting ready to go. We're getting ready to go, coming back from the holidays. And for some of us, though, it's not just like, hey, I set a new fitness goal. I set a new, enter in goal here. I want to learn to code. I want to learn this. I want to learn that. This is my New Year's resolution. For some of us, it is difficult and our mental well-being will take a hit. And this is me. I, kind of take a few days off, take a week off, whatever it is around the holidays. And I'm like, great, I got to come back. Here we go. Let's start this up. Let's take a look at this slew of emails, right? And what's probably not helping it is there's still Christmas goodies laying around the house that I'm indulging in. Usually stuff like candy because it's not perishable or takes a long time to perish, I should say, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm just having a lot of sugar. I'm drinking a lot of caffeine. I'm having hot cocoa all the time. And so not only am I, kind of in the dumps because it's, the post-holiday blues, of which the holidays were busy themselves. Now I'm also not, eating, not drinking the greatest. So I think that it's about time to take charge. And I'm starting to take charge, of course, with friend of the show, Magic Mind. So I've decided to, lower my sugar intake. I'm going to skip some of that hot cocoa. I'm going to try to skip some of those goodies. And I'm also going to try to get back on track, lowering my caffeine intake, lowering the amount of coffee that I'm drinking. Now, basically what I've decided at this point is like, this is my new thing is I'm going to go back to where I was at the end of last year. I had a really high level, I would say, of mental resilience. I wasn't kind of down in the dumps, rolling my eyes at every email, sort of like, kind of crawling out of bed, or like the other day, I just like had my laptop in bed, just kind of like almost just like groaning to myself, answering emails and doing stuff that just I was totally fine with. I was firing on all cylinders at the end of 2024 before the holidays hit. And so I'm taking back my mental resilience. And actually, there's something that's pretty exciting happening on the Magic Mind side of things. So there is an exciting bundle that is actually called the 24 hours pack. So it includes both the focus and the sleep shots. Now, I have actually never tried the sleep shots. The things I've been talking to you about in previous episodes and the things that I'm familiar with and the things that I drink and the thing that I'm using to take back my mental resilience is the focus shots, my mental performance shot. Well, they now have a sleep shot, and these focus and sleep shots are going to be bundled for the first time. And we actually have an offer here. You can get up to 45% off the bundle if you use my link and my code. So my link is magicmind.com/HTML_podbjan. I'm going to spell that out. So magicmind.com/HTMLPODBjan, JAN. Again, that's HTMLPODBJAN. So use that at the end of the link, magicmind.com, use the code. And if it asks you for a code, use that code as well. I was going to say it again, but I'll remind you before the end of the episode. And remember to go and check this new pack out. I have not tried the actual sleep shots myself, but they promise to help you fall asleep faster and get a deeper rest, which will also strengthen your mental resilience.
Heck yeah. That's what I want right now. I need my mental resilience strengthened, that's for sure. It's been a long holiday and a long few days with my daughter not sleeping, so I'd be down for some of those sleep shots. But
I mean, I just told you, Mike, that I was like, man, February is looking like a pretty good time to take off a few days already.
Yeah, I would not mind a couple days of not doing anything. But having said that, let's move on to the next segment here, which is all about Astro. So Astro has come out of this JavaScript survey as kind of like the darling of 2024. It has the highest increase in positivity, the highest retention scores. SvelteKit has the second highest retention scores, by the way. It has the highest increase in interest. And it's also used in actual work, like work environments, higher than SvelteKit this year. I think it jumped over SvelteKit this year. So it's just dominating the field. And first of all, kind of like a breakdown, what is Astro? Again, Astro is a meta framework. The big difference here is that the meta framework doesn't lock you into using a specific front-end framework. I think Astro really stands out by that because for any front-end component that you want to write, you can use React, Vue, Svelte, any other front-end library essentially. And it allows that kind of flexibility to allow anyone from any front-end to come in and start building a full stack application with both the server and the front end all in one go. I think that flexibility is really winning a lot of people over. I think a lot of people that are kind of confused about maybe some of these meta frameworks, again, Next.js being probably the main one with its way of handling server components. A lot of people switch to Astro because of that. I think even with SvelteKit, there is some kind of confusion a little bit with how they do routing and how they separate server and client. I like it, but I can understand people wanting to use the Astro approach of islands, which allows you to build like essentially components that can be rendered on the server, or components that are only in the client, and being able to separate that out in a really, really unique way. I really do like Astro, and I think if I had the time, that would be the next framework that I would really dive into, because again, I love Svelte. I kind of love that you can use Svelte with Astro, and the fact that you're not locked in, right? Like even if like Svelte goes away, I could just switch my front-end components to React and still use the same meta framework. Really cool, really interesting concept for a meta framework. I think they've executed extremely well. They make it super easy to get started, which is really, really important in my opinion. I think some of the complexities that come with some of the other frameworks, I think that's why I liked SvelteKit so much, is because it had that simplicity. Astro takes it to another level. It's even easier to get started. So I think it's winning, deservingly winning. It doesn't do everything perfectly. It's not as good for like a large web app application. I think SvelteKit and Next.js are better for that. But for most applications, documentation sites, blog sites, stuff like that, I think Astro is phenomenal. And I think that's where most of the web still lives, in those kind of more information heavy, just, hey, here's how to update and present information. That's where Astro shines. Now, having said that, I think they are moving towards being able to do everything really well. So I think, the next few years might even be better for it.
Well, I was going to ask you this. I think, and I don't remember what his answer was, but I think we asked James Quick whether Astro felt more like a transitionary tool. So like Astro to me, from the outside looking in, I haven't used it myself, kind of seems like it's the answer to this sort of unhappiness curve, right? Or to try to kind of calm some of this chaos. Like you said, I can take some of my front end components that I built in Svelte or SvelteKit, and I can actually say, all right, SvelteKit, either it's not being updated anymore for some reason, or something, some other hypothetical happens where you can't use it any longer. So you're going to move over and you're going to start using React for whatever reason, right? You're going to start making your content boxes with React, and then they'll both work with Astro. Does that feel to you, Mike, like in your opinion, does that feel like a stopgap? Like, does that feel like Astro is designed to not always be here, at least in its current state? Like, is this very much sort of like a transitionary device? Like, are we slowly working toward like a more cohesive, like, I mean, as you said that there's been some calls for like an all-inclusive sort of framework with auth and all these other things. Do you think that Astro is kind of this transitionary tool right now, and it's sort of like everybody come together a little bit? Like, is that what do you think on that?
I think it's kind of the opposite. I think because of the fact you have so much choice inside of Astro, and it really like doubles down on that, it's a little bit more open to anything and less opinionated, if that makes sense. Now, it has some opinions on, again, how to handle islands. Like islands is a really big opinionated kind of way of handling components. So that is something that would play into what you're saying, Matt, like, just a more guided experience. But overall, I think in general, it doesn't have auth built in. It has some like patterns that you could follow to build off, but so does every other framework. I don't think it's going the route of how I believe SvelteKit might go. Like, I think SvelteKit is more of that, like, potential to be that, all-inclusive thing that you just pick up and you have the basis of a web application, all of the tools to build one inside of it. I could be wrong on that, by the way. I think this is just like a maybe wishful thinking from my end. But overall, Astro, to me, is more of the opposite of that, where like you have the ability to choose whatever you want for every piece, especially like the front end, right? Like there's no opinions on what front end you're even using. So it could be pretty chaotic. Like you can have a component built in React and in Svelte and working in the same application. You don't even have to choose one, which is cool, but also leans into that like chaotic nature of web development. So yeah, I don't know if this is the solution for that. I think it's the solution for a really great way to build large data heavy websites, because it's like a very server first architecture where everything is rendered on the server and then just served HTML essentially. They're like a no JavaScript framework almost, where when the default configuration is everything happens on the server and it serves HTML to the front end, and there's no JavaScript even in the package. So there's like obviously some speed benefits and stuff to that as well. So like that's where it's leaning towards content, like serving content really fast and really efficiently.
So do you see then like Astro being a temporary thing at all? Or do you see it kind of existing forever? Because like obviously you have a different opinion of it like than what I was kind of thinking of, like, oh, this is just sort of like that transitionary. Do you see Astro as being, another like thing that's always there? And then I guess another question is then, so like the impression I'm getting, and this might be totally incorrect, is roughly you would learn your 3 pillars. If you're brand new, you learn your 3 pillars: your HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript. You then choose a framework. So you might choose like a SvelteKit, for example. And then you learn Astro? Is that where we're at here? So we're adding like another layer?
Not really. Like you learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you would go in and choose a front-end framework, for instance, React or Svelte. Now, the complicated thing with that is that all of these frameworks are now starting to push their meta frameworks as the way to learn the framework themselves. So yes, in a sense, you're correct. Like you would learn SvelteKit, which would make Astro a little bit redundant in that case, because again, Astro does the same thing as SvelteKit would do, like the backend stuff.
Right.
And so what you would do is you would learn Svelte inside of SvelteKit, and then you'd be like, I don't like SvelteKit, so I'm going to look at something else that uses Svelte that can also do this backend stuff in a more clean way and serve content really, really efficiently. And then that's when you would go with Astro. So do I think it's a transitionary thing? Not really. I think it's just a use case thing where like, if you're really like adamant about serving really good content heavy websites, that's when you would lean Astro. And then if you're really adamant about serving really complex web applications and you have many moving parts to the web application, like dashboards and all that, you would probably choose a different meta framework like SvelteKit or Next.js.
So let me ask you a question there then. Like you were saying, like so the meta framework for Svelte is SvelteKit. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
so
the
like
first party one. Yeah.
Now like so the first party one. So Svelte and SvelteKit are kind of like married together, but they are indeed separate things.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
What's interesting though is like you were saying, well, if what the learning path might be is if you were to go and you say, I'm going to choose Svelte, what you're actually choosing is Svelte plus SvelteKit, and commonly just called SvelteKit at this point.
That's what they're pushing towards. Yeah. That's like
sorry, go ahead.
That's what they're pushing towards. They're making you like kind of learn Svelte inside of SvelteKit rather than spinning up like a Vite Svelte, which is how we initially were using Svelte before. And you can still do that. I want to be clear. Like you can still build just a Svelte application, but in their documentation, like in Svelte's documentation, they're kind of leading you away from that.
So then, with that being said, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So you were saying that if you learn Svelte, separate of SvelteKit, which is unlikely, and then you try to learn SvelteKit, and you say, I don't like that, then you'd go to Astro?
Well, if you don't like the SvelteKit part of of the application, of the building experience.
But would it be like, so this is a major problem in my brain every time, is I always have trouble separating. And when I'm learning Svelte/SvelteKit, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Whenever I go to dive into any, like, playing with it, it's even worse. So I guess what I'm trying to say is could anyone even come up with that conclusion? Like, what's the chances of coming up with that conclusion? Like, wouldn't they just be like, this whole thing sucks?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I think it would be difficult to get there for a junior developer, like coming into the industry. It's more of someone that's already like pretty seasoned that would understand the differences between those frameworks and make a conscious choice to go away from one to the other, because they already have a good understanding of the separation between Svelte and SvelteKit, or React and Next.js. And therefore, to them, it would be an easier switch. Whereas for a junior dev just getting into it, they're probably going to go down a quote unquote happy path of learning Next.js or SvelteKit right off the bat, and probably sticking to that until they understand the separations. And at that point, they would go to Astro. That's just my opinion. Like, I think that's how the web is formed, right? Like how blog posts, suggestions, roadmaps, those are the roadmaps that I've seen around here. Like, I haven't seen too many people trying to push, successfully at least, the jump into Astro right from JavaScript, like right after JavaScript, learning JavaScript. Like that I haven't seen very often.
So Astro, with that, to you, like, this is just your opinion, obviously, to Astro is not to be worried about by junior or aspiring developers.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's something to know what it is, but I would not focus on it when you're trying to learn languages and trying to learn frameworks and stuff like that. I would just focus on learning Next.js, essentially, understanding the separation between React and Next, and then everything else kind of starts to make sense. So the biggest challenge is what you're saying, like understanding that separation,
right?
Where JavaScript is, where React is, and where Next.js is. Like, when you understand that separation goes through any meta framework. So you could take that knowledge pretty much almost one-to-one and go to Next.js, SvelteKit, and understand how that separation works. It's just initially, because everything's so tightly coupled together, it's a little bit chaotic. You just have to power through.
I'm going to sound the alarm bell and say we're starting to do stuff again that is not sustainable from a maintenance perspective and sustainable from a learning perspective. I'm going to say that, like, that, I know that's my opinion. I haven't jumped into this stuff really too hard. I've jumped into Svelte/SvelteKit a few times, but I'm starting to get to this point where, like, I'm starting to think, like, I don't know how sustainable this kind of stuff is. Like, in my brain, as an outsider looking in, that's where I'm at, right? This is my opinion. This might be totally wrong, but I know there's going to be some elitists out there that are like, Matt, you're an idiot. Like, it's just this, and this and that, and this thing over here, this thing. It's like, okay, well, what if driving a car was that complex?
Yeah, it is complex. I think it is. It's not insurmountably complex. Like, there's plenty of people that are still getting in to the industry within a year. Like,
I think you can get in, but I think what my problem is, what I'm starting to think of is, we're starting to add so many layers that, like, when issues arise, like, I feel like issues are going to arise more often. They're going to be more difficult to fix. Fixes that we implement may work, but they may be band-aids that we don't even we're not even aware are band-aids, that we're like, oh, I'm accidentally patching just the JS layer rather than, like, the Astro layer. Oh no, it's actually the Svelte. Oh, no, wait, maybe it's the Svelte. Like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, this is, like, again, this is my outside looking in, and it could be totally naive and I could be totally wrong, but this feels like we're starting to get to a point that's not sustainable to me.
Yeah, we've been there for a while.
Right. Like, we've been kind of, like, heading toward that here and there, whatever. But, like, we're also starting to put a lot of stuff online.
Yeah.
Or, like, we have, I suppose. And I don't know if it's still growing or whatever. I haven't done the numbers. But, like, to me, that's concerning.
There's a lot of janky code out there. A lot of janky code.
Well, especially with people using ChatGPT. I mean, I use it.
Yeah, security vulnerabilities are pretty rampant because of this stuff. So that's a huge concern, in my opinion, that isn't being fully addressed.
So these tools, like, oh, just master this tool, but the tool itself is 3 years old. So it's like, well, has the creator mastered the tool yet?
Yeah, good point.
Like, what the hell's like, what's going on here? Like, I don't want to make this sound really bad. This is sincerely what's going off in my head.
No, it's understandable. It's an understandable red flag in the industry. But again, people are getting through it. For people out there that are like maybe trying to reconsider or trying to like going through the same thing that Matt's going through, right? You're in your head, you're like, oh my God, this is overwhelming. And I can understand that. I think the trick to all of this, to make it not overwhelming, is to not think that far ahead, is to focus on the thing that you're learning at that specific time and really just dive into that thing. And then you'll peel back the layers of the onion and it'll start to make sense, I promise. You can't look at it from a whole perspective and be like, that's what scares people. As soon as they start looking 5 steps ahead in the JavaScript world, you're sunk. You have to give yourself that ability to focus on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and understand it and then move on and understand it and then move on. And the natural progression of that will be enough to carry you through. And then you'll start to understand that separation. You'll start to understand the complexities. You'll start to see where this stuff falls apart a little bit, because it does fall apart. And then you'll start to become a better developer, essentially. If you focus on everything at once, you're done.
Devs, this one's for you. I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things you can do in 30 seconds or less on Studio. Integrate, extend, and write custom scripts in a VS Code-based IDE. Leverage zero setup dev, test, and production environments. Ship faster with an AI code assistant. And work with Wix headless APIs on any tech stack. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Link in the show description and in the show notes. And you know what? And that makes sense. Like in school, we learn like math over years. We don't start with like Laplace, or we don't start with like derivatives. I get that. Totally understand that. And like, yes, like humans can do complex things. I'm not trying to make things super easy for us. It's just, to me, it's like we just keep adding these layers that we're adding too many layers. I'm just going to leave it at that. Like it's a lot. It's a lot of freaking layers. And I would like to say one final thing is I feel like this is actually the reason why technical interviews are probably so difficult. Again, this is my opinion, and I haven't like done a bunch of math and like checked on technical interviews and things like that. But it's like people are like Mike's right. To learn this stuff, just dive in and do it, right? Dive in and do it, try to figure it out, right? Usually on a portfolio project where it means literally nothing. If someone steals your name when you're trying to put your name out, like, or you know what I mean? Or so you put like the name like Johnny Appleseed in there to like play with a database, and someone's like, haha, I've hacked into your database and stole Johnny Appleseed. It's like, cool. What? Who cares, right? I get it. Like a no or low stakes portfolio project is a great way to like make mistakes like that. I mean, I've published API keys and stuff like an idiot before too. The thing is, though, is that now these mistakes may be obfuscated, and for these technical interviews, to get back to that before I go on a tangent, the technical interviews, where and what are these guys going to talk about? Like Mike's correct in terms of like the reality of the situation is learn what you're learning. Like learn what you're doing by going through it and like diving in and learning it and breaking things and, you know, make mistakes to get messy, miss frizzle, yay. But the thing is, what is the person that's interviewing going to do? Like, are they going to be like, they're going to pull up like, you know, what, like this and go like, okay, TypeScript, command. Don't know it? Later. Next. Like, is that like, how strict are they going to be? Are they going to be realistic? Are they not? And this is likely, I would imagine, why technical interviews are so chaotic, because you're not learning that way. You're not learning like in a textbook way like that. But somebody may just go like, we need to get through 150 applicants. Let's go.
Yeah, web development technical interviews can be kind of crazy, but just learn what technologies are in demand around you, and that makes it a little bit easier, I would say. Not super easy. Like, definitely still some nuance to it, but this is on top of any sort of like algorithm-based questions as well, right? So a lot of technical interviews will throw, even with web development not being algorithm heavy, you'll still have to answer algorithm, which is, it's tough. Like the interviewing is very difficult right now, like very, very difficult. But having said that, I think we can move on to the next part of this episode, which is just a quick talk on the JS features that people are really enjoying. I'm really only going to talk about the one because I found it really fascinating that like a significant portion of people, like 85%, said that nullish co-sailing was something that they really were hyped about. Right? And let me explain. Nullish co-sailing.
Hang on a second. Is it coalescing?
Maybe, yes.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to
coalescing. Thank you.
Because I just saw it visually for the first time right now.
Yes, exactly. So essentially, it's a way to do conditional statements in one line. And the conditional statement being, if A is not defined or null, then B in one line with 2 question marks. So the syntax is literally let result is equal to A, question mark, B. That's it. And if A is undefined or null, the result of that equation will be B, whatever is in B. If A is defined in any sort of way, the result of that would be A. Period. Really, like it's a really simple syntax. And the reason people like it is because it replaces the or, like the double pipe or operator. And the or operator was not nullish coalescing in the sense that you had to check for the existence of a value in 2 different ways. So if a value was 0, I think, give me a second. If a value was 0, value of 0 with an or would be considered undefined. And obviously in certain situations, you want 0 to be presented as defined, as a defined value. That would not exist in an or operator for whatever reason. It was a strange little JavaScript quirk that you had to like detect essentially. If you needed to detect 0 as a potential value, you needed to do that in a separate statement on top of the or. Now you can do it in one go. So having said all this, it's surprising to me how many people said that this was the thing that they're most hyped about in JavaScript, because I can't imagine this being that important. Again, it was 1 extra line of code that you have to write, and only when 0 meant something. If 0 meant nothing, then it was a good thing. And you use 0 as an undefined, you're good. Then you can use the or. You can no longer do that with nullish co-sailing. You could still use the or for that reason. Whatever. I just found that fascinating. Like literally 11,467 people labeled it as something that they're interested in or something that they really liked in JavaScript. That's like how much? 85% of the people taking this freaking survey. I mean, I like it, but holy crap, that's crazy.
They just want nullish coalescing to be their next Oblivion character name or their next RPG character name. That's all they want.
Yeah, to their credit, there wasn't much like competing with it. The next one on the list is dynamic imports.
Which is I mean, how much less in like interesting is the name? Nullish coalescing versus dynamic import.
I like dynamic imports. I would have put that that's my number one, I would say, if I had to list it, because essentially import statements at the top of JavaScript files. That's how normal JavaScript files work, especially with bundlers. That's cool. But what happens if you want to import something only in a condition of something else existing, and therefore saving bundle sizes, saving the size of the web page and stuff like that, like having it so that the web page doesn't import something or, contact a third-party library essentially, unless there's something there present that like conditionalizes that. So being able to like do dynamic importing within your code makes it so that you can write more efficient, cleaner code. I've wanted that for actually a little while now. I've run into several situations where I've just had to like kind of jank together or just like accepted the fact that I have to import this big library no matter what. So that seemed to be the thing that should have won, in my opinion. It was second, so I guess I could have been right. But yeah, everyone just loves that nullish. All
bizarre.
Right.
Crazy.
Bizarre. Exactly. Bizarre.
I mean, it's not that crazy. It's just for comedic purposes, it's awesome.
Right. And so the next thing that I have here is a TypeScript conversation. So in case, I think this releases actually after my article will be released. This is kind of not referencing, but giving more credence to the article that I have released, which is about JavaScript versus TypeScript. So you can go check that article out on htmlthings.com. Essentially, TypeScript is now used by the majority of JavaScript developers. we're at the point where the biggest category inside of this balance, like the TypeScript JavaScript balance, is using only TypeScript, like 100% TypeScript. It kind of is represented between like people that are using a 50-50, a little bit between 50-50 and a little bit and then less than 50-50. And by far, most of the people are below the 50-50 towards TypeScript. So more than, I think 67% of respondents stated that they write more TypeScript than JavaScript. So that's the big number here. We're at the point where JavaScript is now kind of just being buried to some degree to like maybe people that are doing Webflow stuff, people that are forced to use it in more cases than not, right? Like some people are forced to use JavaScript because their no-code tool doesn't support TypeScript, or for whatever other reason. There's probably other reasons, and those are the people who are kind of stuck in that camp. Most people are doing compiled code with TypeScript and having that kind of awesome benefit of being able to see if they've labeled a type correctly and know from one file to another, what needs to be passed in and what can't be passed in. Really, really convenient technology. I highly recommend people learn TypeScript, dive into TypeScript as soon as they understand the basis of JavaScript.
So would you say TypeScript before framework? Three pillars and then TypeScript?
It's a good point. I would say you can learn TypeScript with a framework at the same time. A lot of frameworks will come. Yeah, a lot of frameworks will come with TypeScript built in, and a lot of their examples will be TypeScript based examples. So like it's kind of a natural thing, and they come with the bundler already already kind of done for you. Like if you're just going to learn TypeScript outside of a framework, then you have to set up your own bundler that does all the TypeScript bundling for you and your own type check. Like that's a little bit of a pain. So like I think learning TypeScript when you jump from JavaScript to a framework is probably the natural progression that everyone's going to go through. It's not too crazy to learn it because TypeScript, you could still write JavaScript inside of like with TypeScript. It's not forcing you to do anything. It's just like little things here and there. You'll start noticing better autocomplete. You'll start noticing like you hover over something and it shows you a type from a library, right? Like you import a library that has TypeScript types. You see the benefits of that right away. And you start to slowly kind of integrate with that. Like don't just jump in and start writing generics. That's crazy. You start to like see the benefits of it, and then you start to kind of bring in the more complex stuff when you need it.
Wait, so you shouldn't just like go and like do like the quote unquote my first app with TypeScript?
Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. Personally.
I got a headache.
Yeah. Okay, so that's TypeScript. Learn TypeScript. Everyone's learning it. That's obvious from this survey. It's the dominant type checker for JavaScript. There's nothing really coming close to it. Last thing we're going to talk about, AI. So this one was interesting. The first thing here is how many people are using AI code generation? Now, I don't know if you've seen it yet. Have you opened up the thing? So perfect. What would you say? I've kind of biased you a little bit because of how I've presented it. But what would you say is the percentage of people that use AI to help them write code in this survey, just from the top?
I'm going to say that the official number is going to come in at like, this is a weirdly specific thing. I'm going to say the official number is going to come in at like 34% of people. But I'm willing to assume that many are like, no, I don't use AI. I don't use that thing.
I wonder if that's it. Like that was my guess too. Like, but yeah. So what? So you're saying 34, right?
34% of people I would assume 20. Out of the survey is what actually use AI, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's lower because people are just like, no, I don't use that thing.
20%, yeah.
So that's the official number is 20%.
The official number is 20%, yeah.
Okay. With
like a significant amount either using none, like literally 0%, which is, I can't even believe that. 20% of people in this survey have said they use zero AI. I should be clear. Okay. There's 38% of people that have said they use a very minimal amount of AI. So the majority of this breakdown is in that top loaded close to 0%.
Yeah, 38% close to zero, 20% none.
I kind of call bullshit on this, like you're saying. I feel like people are embarrassed to say it, which is super weird to me. Like, why are you embarrassed? Like,
it's a new thing. Everyone's going to hate on a new thing until it becomes
It's an anonymous survey, though. Like, what is the embarrass? I don't know. It's a really maybe it's not embarrassment. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe maybe we're wrong, and maybe this is actually the case in industry. Like people
Maybe I should be embarrassed.
people just don't use AI. And to me, that is crazy. To me, that's crazy, because even if you use it sparingly to just kind of check your code or whatever, it's going to increase productivity. Like, it's increasing productivity like crazy. If you're going to refuse to use it and another developer on your team uses it, they're going to be a faster developer than you. I don't want to say better, but faster for sure. So you need to consider that part of this. Like, coding, like development space is becoming a competition. There's going to be less and less jobs available, at least for the big companies. Now, there might be more companies opened up and therefore more jobs available as a whole. Maybe that's just a theory. But overall, like, you need to start putting yourself ahead. And if you're refusing to use one of the pretty much most foundational changes to our industry in the last decade, you're going to be falling behind. Like, it might be a little bit sensational. Like, I might be saying something sensational, but like, I've used many different tools. I was skeptical initially about it. This is the thing. Like, if you don't learn how to use it and learn how to use it effectively without generating, nonsense code, yeah, you're going to be falling behind. I don't think there's any ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, a seasoned developer that knows how to use AI is going to be more effective than a seasoned developer that does not know how to use AI. Just think on that segment. Like, don't compare yourself to and in fact, this might be more sensational. A mediocre developer using AI will be just as, if not more effective than some seasoned developers. So you're competing with many different aspects here. Learn to use the tool. Now, know that the tool isn't perfect. Yeah, it makes mistakes, and that's probably why you're not using it, because it generates some gibberish code for you, and you're like, fuck this, I don't want to deal with it. Totally possible, but you can do things like prompting it correctly, checking over the code, doing smaller generations, having comments in your code that are a little bit more descriptive. There's many different ways to make it so that it generates better code, and if you tried it 2 years ago, it's gotten exponentially better than it was 2 years ago. So there's many different avenues for you to try it now. Like, you can do just ChatGPT asking questions back and forth. You can do AI code completion with Copilot or Cursor or SuperMaven. Like, there's tons of different tools. Try the different tools. Find a path that works for you that makes you more effective, just like with anything, like with a new editor, with the new terminal, with Vim, whatever you're using, whatever tool you needed to use, you initially had to learn how to use it to make you more effective. This is the same thing. Sometimes it's going to make you less effective, but the majority of times it's going to make you more effective. I can guarantee it. So don't disregard it. Use it. Learn what it's writing. Obviously, don't trust it completely, but definitely make it more productive. Make yourself more productive.
Well, it's interesting too, because like AI will give you ideas too. Like, what I was going to actually ask is, like, some of my code is definitely like inspired by AI, and I was curious whether people like don't consider that AI code generated then. Like, if they, and I guess I don't really know if I would either. Like, if I went to a ChatGPT thing and I asked it, I had like a complex problem, but I asked it a simple problem just to get inspiration on how to solve it. And then I largely based like the architecture of my solution around what ChatGPT suggested, but I wrote it. That's not really AI code generation. So then, like, what level of AI influence is considered AI code generated code, right? Like, some people are going to have a bit of a scale there. Some people would say, well, if I change anything, then it's not AI generated. So like, what, like, that's going to add some nuance into questions like this too, right? Because some people would be like, yeah, but like, I only used 100 lines out of 1,500. I mean, fair enough. Like, do you call that code AI generated?
Yeah, I mean, the question is literally for AI assisted coding, not generated code.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a fair point, right?
Yeah, so it would have to be like, do you talk to ChatGPT? Has to be part of that. Like, if it's assisted in any way, it has to be considered. So like, I think it's everything.
But is it, do you have to, so for example, okay, so this is just the paragraph above the chart we're looking at here. It says, for all the talk of AI assisted coding, most of us still only use AI tools sparingly And in fact, a whole 20% do not use them whatsoever to produce code. Now, I don't know if they really thought about using that word specifically, but to produce code. So does that, what I'm saying is if I go to it and I go, hey man, I forget how a for loop works, and it generates a for loop for me, and it just gives me a basic example, and then I write my own thing, would I say, no, I don't use AI code generation?
Maybe, and it could be that's how people are kind of constricting it and stuff like that. If you're using it at any way to assist you, it counts as writing AI assisted code. That's my opinion. If you have any sort of unless you change every single line that it writes for you, every single word that it writes for you, then maybe it's not, but I don't know why you would. So if it's writing any sort of code or giving you direction in writing code, then that's AI assisted code generation. You're having an AI help you.
But code, I think what maybe people are getting stuck up on, and this is, again, we're starting to speculate at this point, but what I'm wondering is if a lot of people are using ChatGPT as a glorified Google, a Google search, excuse me. If you go back, even 2-3 years, and you're like, I'm going to go Google search something, which a lot of people still do, and then they find they type in their error, they type in what they're trying to build, and they find a Stack Overflow post, and they go to Stack Overflow and they read the thing. The chances of that code that they find actually working like a copy paste is relatively low. Them going in and really manipulating that, or just being influenced by what the solution presented is, I want to know if people are considering that AI generated. Because I wouldn't, if I go and look at a solution and I go, oh, I'm missing a couple semicolons, or oh, I need another loop in here, and then I just go do it and I don't copy paste, I wouldn't call my piece of code Stack Overflow generated.
But it's Stack Overflow assisted.
Correct. That is correct. And I understand that this chart is saying AI assisted. I understand that. But what I'm thinking is in terms of the layman, in terms of the layman talking, if you're just, ripping through this survey, I'm wondering how many people are no, I don't generate code on here.
It might be that. Yeah.
I'm just curious. This is me just curiosity. I'm not trying to poke fun or say you're wrong or anything.
Yeah. It's just surprising to me that it's such a low number. Yeah. That's really what came out of this. And that's why I wanted to kind of just explain that, hey, you guys need to learn how to use these tools. This is not going away. This is the way we're going to code in the future. And it's going to get more progressive into the AI generation as the AIs become better. So you're going to have to learn to use them and evolve with the usage as well. It's going to be tough to survive without that, in my opinion. Again, this it's an opinion, but
well,
I think it's correct.
You're on I think you might be on the right track, and there's actually data to potentially indicate that. And it's right here on these charts. I went back to the JavaScript pain points chart, for example. JavaScript pain points had only 10,599 question respondents with a 76% completion rate down here, is what it says. So 76 completion rate out of 14,015 survey participants. So remember, 10,599 respondents. We go down to that AI code generation chart specifically. What's listed currently is 11,371 question respondents with an 81% completion rate. Mm-hmm. So it's a higher completion rate and it's a higher question respondents. So that's to me, that means there's more people chiming in, which means there's going to be more exposure for AI because obviously it's freaking everywhere, which is good news because that means it's going to catch more people's thoughts. It's going to, at the very least, be on people's minds, and they may go, hey, Bill, like you said, Mike, Bill's doing way better than me, but he's not actually a better developer. What the heck's he doing? He's ChatGPT and like crazy. I better do that. They're already aware of what to do. They're not like, Bill, what's ChatGPT?
Absolutely. And again, this is actually, I was wrong a little bit. This is actually a percentage of your code that is AI generated.
Oh,
that's what this is. So how much of your code is AI generated? So that could be perceived in different ways. You're right. That could be if you're using it as a back and forth and they just suggest different things and you write the code, that's not AI generated.
With that being said, then I would agree with this actual number. So I would say this is actually quite honest, maybe. I mean, again, this is me just speculating, but 10% does make a lot of sense because again, if I got it to generate me one loop and then I went and made 100 loops like it throughout my code, but they're all different, they're manipulated and stuff, I would call the first loop AI generated. I would not call the other 100 loops AI generated. I would not call them that.
Yeah, I think that does skew it a little bit in more reasonable terms. I think realistically, I'm probably in the 10 to 20% mark right now for generated code. Maybe approaching 30 in some situations, honestly, because I've just been learning to prompt a little bit better and reviewing code a little bit better. But again, it's not that high. Like it's, there's very few here that have 100% AI generated code. There's 18 people. And I think they're being a little bit facetious. Like that's a pretty intense statement to make. Like I wouldn't trust an 100% AI generated application, at least in production, maybe in like a test application or something.
No, you and I were playing with that, like sort of like we call it like the thermometer, like task thing.
Yeah.
But like that was just between us. Like if somebody leaks my email, I mean, it's public.
Yeah. And so, even then I had to go in and do some like random stuff. Like it wouldn't be 100%. Like, yeah. Yeah. And that's a test application. So like, yeah, it would be tough to say that, but I think that's more representative. You're right. So yeah, I'm glad we got down to that. Anyway, point still stands. Use AI, learn how to use AI. Don't overwhelmingly use it. Don't put 100% of your trust into it, but definitely learn to use it. I think that's it though. I think the survey was really interesting. I thought it was a really good indicator. I think you should go check it out yourself. There's plenty of more you can check out that we did not cover. Like Matt said, there's a bunch of JavaScript pain points that are really interesting. Happiness, more happiness levels. Yeah, it's a really cool survey. We'll probably cover it again next year.
All right. Yeah. Well, I think that basically concludes my thing as well. What's kind of interesting, though, I would like to point just as one final note, and this isn't about this survey in particular, is that in the past we used the Stack Overflow survey in years past. I think at least once for sure, but I think we've done it a couple times. And honestly, like I haven't been on Stack Overflow nor really like talked about it until today, and I'm talking about it in retrospect. That's kind of crazy. Like AI is kind of like taken over that part of my life, which is really nuts.
They've lost over 50% of their traffic.
That's that's crazy.
Yep.
Just comes out and just bam, and then that's it. That sucks. That sucks for them. Like literally, I'm not trying to poke fun. That really does suck. But what does not suck is that you can actually take advantage of this exciting Magic Mind bundle. Remember, that includes Magic Mind Sleep, as well as the Mental Performance Shot, just the regular Magic Mind. The one I actually have right beside me in its little container here. It says Mental Performance Shot, subtly sweet, sharper mind, lower stress, better energy. You can take advantage of up to 45% off of the Magic Mind bundle. Again, the Performance Shot and Magic Mind Sleep with my link, magicmind.com/HTML podbjan. I'm going to spell that out. So magicmind.com/HTML podbjan. So the end of that URL is also our code. So if it asks you for the code, enter that code into the text box that appears. Again, my link and my code up to 45% off to get that Magic Mind bundle. But I think other than that, that concludes this episode. So remember that if you want to support episodes like this, you can go to Patreon. That is patreon.com/HTML check out the tiers and give that a go. And Mike, entertain the people because I accidentally just closed my Patreon document like a fool.
Sure, let's entertain the people with the awards. The most adopted technology this year is Vite. Not surprising. It's the bundler that every single library and framework is using. So congratulations, Vite.
Congratulations, Vite. And also thank you to our $3 tier patrons. Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Mosteler via the website swoonworthydesigns.com. And we'd like to give a shout out to Michael Araka, a contributing author on HTMLallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. And just recently, we just actually posted a post by another author on there, Mike Berg. Go check that out. He wrote an article on how to get started using Tailwind CSS. There's a nice guide on HTMLallthethings.com. Go and check that out. And feel free to leave a comment to review the platform that you are listening to this on. And this outro will sign us off.
You've been been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.